Well, thank you for joining me here again. A few questions that we didn't get to cover in that last segment. And again, speak as freely as you want for as long as you want. But these questions might be related in some way, they may tie together, or they may be entirely disparate thoughts. But you've mentioned in the conversation uh, a few times that there was a moment in 2019 when your son got the insurance that you fell into this idea that you just take 6 months off and clear your mind and sort of reset. You also said that I think in some therapy or with some treatment with a doctor recently, they told you, oh, don't worry so much about it. It was not your only choice, but it was a decision you made at the time that you had to make for some reason. Well,
Right, yeah, for survival. Yeah, that's what they say. Yeah.
well, when you said that, there was something about the way you said it or an expression on your face that suggested that maybe you think otherwise, that it wasn't your only option. If you can think back to 2019 of when that happened, do you see in hindsight, in retrospect, do you see any specific event, specific time or something where you could have corrected a misstep and maybe gone a different route?
I don't know. I don't think I don't I mean I'm thinking I don't really think looking back that there's anything I could have, because like I say, resigning ultimately, I think and still think was was what I needed to do. And I don't know if there's any way that I could have gotten around that part of it, because I was see, because what had happened, Tim, you got to realize is also, or I've got to realize, I had that motorcycle wreck the entire time that I'm laid up at home, knees up in the air. My whole left side was damaged, that I was using. I began, that to go back to work, it was for like 2 days, realized that I couldn't get around very well. I couldn't get up to the pilot house 5 flights up with my knee the way it was. I came back home for another, whatever it was, 2 months or something. That in that time frame, I had built up such a tolerance and started, unbeknownst to me, develop a dependency that, was it because I had so much time off and I guess you'd say, daily, that the addiction got worse? Yeah, that's, but also, and because I don't know, I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but who knows when I had that wreck if that didn't do something. I never lost consciousness. I was awake the whole time and everything, but I'm learning more about, say, like, for example, genetic testing and whatnot. Some of these different things that are still new to me. Whenever I wrecked, maybe the impact. I mean, I wasn't going fast, about 20 mile an hour, but when you do that with an 800-pound bike off in a ditch, you're going to jar something loose, or you're going to jar something that maybe hasn't been knocked loose in a while. And to go on more of a, I guess you'd say, kind of a, I don't want to say supernatural, but on more of a mental, note, is I'm skeptical, but I'm open minded to learning more about it. Is whenever you have things happen to you, as a person, as a child, emotionally, trauma, what have you, poor experiences that aren't processed at that point in time, and they don't become processed, and you keep building on them, and you create these layers. Back to the motorcycle wreck, Tim, I've read where your body stores, your body keeps count. It stores all those traumatic things if you don't process them. And it might be released in the form of, let's say, a physiological sickness, cancer, or, heart palpitation, whatever it might be. That in the past, I would always think, oh, bullshit, how can that happen? But the more I read up now on discoveries that they're making in neuroscience with plasticity and all these other different things, and about, say, stored trauma, I can believe it. So what I'm wondering is, in 2019, to answer your question, I'm wondering if possibly there was a time period, maybe around a motorcycle wreck or the motorcycle wreck itself, that did something to my system to say, okay, we've been dormant. We've been here, but we've been dormant. Now we're going to come out because we can, and your body's immune system's down, and grab a hold type of thing. And what I mean by that is like, for example, autoimmune deficiencies and whatnot, or symptoms where your body attacks itself, are rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, psoriasis. These are all things that I'm learning can be caused by something that happened up here years prior that wasn't dealt with. Does that make sense? But I'm still learning about it. But man, it took me a while to try to wrap my head around that concept, because kind of like the thing of saying, yeah, okay, it wasn't my fault. I was being a smartass because I figure, and I need to, I guess, I just need to stay open-minded is what I need to do. But that's a hard one for me to be open-minded about, because I was raised with the mentality of, when you see someone that's homeless, or someone that's strung out on dope, or someone drunk on booze, or someone that lost their car or whatever, it's their own fault. They did that to themselves. And so with that mindset that I had, that I was taught, that's kind of what I have for myself. This is my fault, nobody else's. I shouldn't have allowed it to happen, but I did. And so when you see that you're allowing something to happen, but there's still there's still like a cushion after, you say, maybe I'll keep tiptoeing, type of thing. Once again, not really with any malicious intent, just because you don't know what's going to happen next. You kind of keep doing what you're doing. Before you know it, things have spiraled to the point where there's not a big cushion left after you've used up all your fucking cushion. And that's when you find yourself, or that's how I find myself now. And so I ask, was I really doing whatever I was at the time because that was the best option and for survival? I don't know. But that's what they say. That's like the way of thinking. My cousin Bridget, she's a forward thinker, like one of those love, peace, and hair grease, save the environment type of people. She's worried about kids 200 years from now, and that's fine. I mean, that's a great way to be. But she says that it's not my fault. And I said, how is it not my fault? So that's something that's a personal battle that I'm still working with. And because of that, it makes it hard for me to give myself grace and forgiveness, because I say I knew better. So
Well,
anything that's happening to me now negative, and any pain that I feel now, I feel like it's my penance. It's what I'm due. It's my punishment.
Well, it can be said that you're suffering the consequences of your decisions in 2019 today. But I don't know if blame or fault are necessarily applicable.
You know, it's funny that you say that because I think about my mom. My mom died 2 years ago, August 1st, and when she died, we hadn't spoken a year and a half, and it still stings to this day. I don't think I've really processed that, but back to point is, in a very short summary, what caused the falling out between my mother and I was an issue over money. Um, a service that I had been providing and paying for, I was no longer going to be able to because I was unemployed. She got royally upset and pissed that I didn't feel was valid. I felt like anything I had been doing, I did out of love because I wanted to make my mom and her mom, which is my grandma, to make their life a little more comfortable. I wasn't doing it because I felt like I had to. But when you expect me to, and the whole time it's been a gift to begin with, and then I can't, it pisses you off. But this is what I got to think about, or this is what I think about now, is my mom is what I think about is the majority of my life. My mom was a fun person. She's a great gal, right? In the end, on the last phone conversation that we had, March 16th, 2021, that did she ever set out to use her son? No. Did she intend from the beginning for our relationship to come apart because of her expecting something from me? No. It's just something that happened, right? I don't think it was her fault, because what mother would sit there and say, "Who I want to be an asshole mother, and and if my son doesn't do something for me, I'm gonna and I can't use him for something, I'm just not gonna talk to him." No one sets out for that. Same thing with this drug addiction. I didn't set out to almost be 50 and to be looking at homelessness right in the eye, to be sick on drugs, to be unemployed, to be alone. I didn't set out for all this. I didn't intend for this. It happened. So like you're saying on the blame thing, whenever I think about it now with my mom, that's why I try to think about just the majority of all the good years we had, because that one little thing that destroyed our relationship, although I still think she was wrong, she didn't intend to do that. She didn't intend to set out to use me. She loved me, just like I didn't intend to put drugs, say, in front of Sherry, my fiance I had, and who was with me all the time. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't intend to. I didn't know I was. I didn't realize I was as it was happening, you know. So I think that there's a lot to be said for that comment of, no one really to blame. Just kind of things happen, events happen, and they might happen quickly, or say, in such a way that you don't you don't realize everything, and you miss one or two little details that should be big red alarms going off. But you say, no, that can't be happening. This person loves me. Surely they wouldn't do that, and you give them the benefit of the doubt. And I would still like to be that way and not be bitter because of someone doing me wrong, you know. Because look at me. I I don't know how my addiction has affected my son or Sherry, or you know, because I've tried to put myself in their shoes, and I think that that helps me understand better, and it helps me understand why I'm alone and everything. But I also sometimes would like for someone to step in mine and say, well, Charlie didn't set out for this, you know. Um, which, by the way, she's coming Friday morning for some moral support for me with my exam. Sherry is. I asked her if she would. She is. Sherry has a special place in my heart because when I would get anxiety eh, for whatever reason, when her and I would go somewhere or even be right here at home, it wouldn't matter. She she was able to calm me and kind of reground me in a way that no one else has been able to, and to really to make me feel at peace, to feel better. And she'd say, honey, you got to breathe, you know, and let it out. And she would kind of get me back to my senses. And I miss that. I miss that companionship. And all I can hope is if the tables were turned, just my opinion, by the way, and if she had a problem with something, alcohol or drugs, that I would like to think that if she asked me for any kind of assistance or help, that I would stay there with her by her side and not leave. But I've not been in Sherry's shoes. Sherry's father was a Vietnam veteran, and he was a providing father, good dad, but he had PTSD from being in Vietnam, and he drank himself to death with in the same home with Sherry. Sherry came home and found him, and she laid there with her dad, and and so knowing that I was doing what I was doing because I was on, she was the first person I told. I mean, I figured I'm sharing a bed with this woman; she should know before anyone, you know. And I told her, and I mean, I cried, man, like a baby. I told her, I said, I'm anyway, and she stuck around for a while. But when I relapsed, she kind of cut it because what she saw maybe in her mind was I can't go through something like I did with my dad, you know. So I got to remember that, you know, because our current behaviors and actions are our core beliefs coming out, you know, and from our own experiences of how we react to things. I'd like to think I would have stayed with her if she were in my shoes, but I haven't had to do what she did, which was live with her dad while he pretty well destroyed himself. She didn't want to see me do that. And so that made me understand it much better, you know.
Like I said before, I'm glad to see you at least considering taking some steps toward progress in tackling this immense hurdle that you have before you now. But um, in our first call a couple of weeks ago, I wrote something down then. I wrote it down again, taking notes, watching watching through the 43 minutes or so that we had. You said, and I quote, "The good old days weren't always so good." I think you were talking about the industry, and Was curious for some more insights on that thought you had.
Yeah, well, I guess because at least I did anyway, when I was younger in the workforce, and whether it be in the military or on the towboats, that you always had the older generation, you know, oh, back, we don't need that. Back in my day, we didn't, blah, blah. And because of that mindset that gets so concrete for some people, um, I try not to put myself in that concrete of a place and to say, well, there are some things about the way we used to do things within the industry that might be lost now or taken away. That are not beneficial, that maybe should still be around. But there are some things that have been introduced that's a lot of, especially the older cats would say, oh, you don't need that. That's just an extra thing of, well, there's a reason why it's in place. Something has happened. A person has gotten hurt, or hopefully not, but maybe even killed, for that rule to be put in place, So there's a reason why you got to wear your life jacket on the bottom deck. There's a reason why you got to wear safety goggles when you're using a needle gun. There's a reason why you got to have on your Mickey Mouse ears down by the engines. I mean, these things help to live a better life. And for a person that I think isn't willing to accept that and wants to stay with the old days and tell a guy, no, just go ahead and you don't need that dust mask. You don't need that. Well, I would beg to differ. I think that the good old days weren't always that fucking good. I mean, there were some times when, you know, like for example, to stick your hands into a 5-gallon bucket of some fluorescent green shit that you didn't really know what it was, but you knew it would take all the tar off the walls on the inside of the boat, because back then we smoked inside the boats, everywhere was smoking in the boats. Now you can't smoke anywhere inside of a vessel that I'm aware of. These are changes. But see, even whenever I smoked, me personally, I didn't ever smoke in any stateroom that I lived in on a boat. I didn't want to smoke where I slept. And call me funny or call me weird, but I didn't want that smell getting into the curtains, getting into my bedding, you know. So there's some things like there's a lot of things that I think, although there might be complaints about, and there might be, words used like overworked or need a secretary, or this, that, which sometimes are valid, that changes along the way, most of them, I think are for the better. For a guy that tells me, yeah, well, back in 1971, we didn't have all these instruments. We had a radar and a swing meter, and that's all we needed. Oh, yeah, well, I mean, I'm talking to a guy who probably stopped also maybe in the middle of the night, on certain rivers, and backed in because you didn't have the extra tools to make you feel safe enough. So you would stop. At least I would, right? Where there's one or two extra instruments that we have now that maybe in 2021 versus 1971 that a guy might keep running and feel very comfortable doing it with no problem because of the extra instruments that he has to help him be more efficient with his job. Because when you had just a radar to swing meter, okay, you might have had 30 pieces coming down on a flooded river. Who knows? Today, on that same river, you might have 40 because you do have the extra equipment and you can do that now. So yeah, I would like to think that I've been someone who's tried to change with the times, because times change, man. Things change. And if a person isn't changing with it and staying stuck in that frame of mind, I don't think there's room for growth, really, whenever a person does that. So the good old days weren't always so good.
And I guess that'll lead me to that last question I wrote down. We were on the phone earlier and you got pretty excitable about an individual. You started telling me a story, and then I asked you if this would be a good time to record. You mentioned a
Oh
guy
yeah,
named
old
named
Hammy.
Brian Hamilton. Yes, sir.
Captain Brian Hamilton, my man. He great guy. And when I say great guy, what I mean is I mean not just a good captain, but if you're ever out traveling towards the east and you come into Brandenburg, Kentucky, Brian, man, he's a stand-up guy. Anyway, we were talking about it one day, and he actually mentioned it first, but it made me think about it, and I think I fell into this category. It made a lot of sense that he said, and this was because I was asking you about your wife with COVID and everything. I've, knock on wood, I personally haven't had COVID, but I believe that something like that right now, if it was severe enough, it would be hard on me to make it. I think because I've got a lower immune system. My system is lowered because I'm not always eating right. I'm not always resting right, and I'm not out amongst the public to build up antibodies. Brian and I were talking about how when we would go home, we get in our vehicles in Paducah. On the way home, it always seemed like sniffles would start a little bit, maybe just a little cough. It might just last a couple of days. And then after it was over with, have your days off, back to work, your first few days back, kind of the same thing. And this was Brian's theory, and it made perfect sense to me anyway. He said, think about it, Chuckles. He goes, you're at home, you're kicking back, as especially as a person ages, going to actual physical places might get less because your kids are getting older. That he says, I think what happens is we stay at home, everything's fine. We're not really exposed to much, maybe a person every once in a while at the gas station or grocery store. But other than that, he said, we stay at home. Then we pack up our life, throw it in the back of our truck to leave for a month, and we go transit over 4, 5, 6 states to catch the boat, stopping at different bathrooms, stopping in different facilities where we haven't been out amongst the people. We're not out every day working. We're not out every day fighting traffic and going to different public bathrooms. Our bodies don't have that immunity. So the first few days on the boat, you feel like shit because maybe you've picked up a little bug or something at a gas station in Macomb, Mississippi, who knows, where there was someone else that had some kind of an illness that you haven't had or been exposed to because you haven't been around people the way that normal public are. Because normal public folks are, especially if they're employed and within the job, that they're out Monday through Friday and they're amongst all this where they're building up immunity. So that's what I was going to mention to you was he brought that up, but when he said that and I thought about it, I thought, that's about the same thing, almost like clockwork that happened with me on my last few years working that they did, because I did chill out a lot more at home on my days off. And other than maybe driving Charlie to school and going to the gas station or the grocery store, I didn't do much. So that made sense to me. And that's why now, and it's kind of a catch 22, almost a kick in the dick, that I understand that my immune system is weakened because I'm isolated and I'm not amongst the germs and whatnot. But I know right now that if I left isolation and just jumped right out both feet first into public, I might wind up catching COVID or something that could be fatal for me, depending on how bad, because my immune system's already down. But yeah, Brian Hamilton, great guy. He's quiet in terms of, say if you were a deckhand Tim's coming up to the pilot house and doing, he might only say just a couple words to you, just hey, how's it going? But what I liked about Brian was he was always very fair, very approachable. live and let live kind of guy. You know, it didn't matter if a deckhand did hunting and fishing like him or was tattooed and pierced like me. He would treat them all, you know, the same. Just a great guy. I guess he's still captain on the Harold Dodd, I'm assuming. I don't know, but he was with, interesting side story, he was with ACBL for years, Brian was, because his dad he was a captain with ACBL. Joe Mack. Joe Mack, there's a boat named after him, Joseph Hamilton. And what made me think to tell you that earlier on the phone is because when you mentioned COVID, the last time I saw Brian, I had taken a motorcycle trip in October of 2020. And I went to Brandenburg, and which I had kept in communication with Brian. He says, "Man, I'm off the boat for, you know, X amount," because I was gone for like 6 weeks on my bike, no destination, just going. I went over to Texas, visited David for a while, stayed at his joint for, even when he caught the boat, he just left me, you know, entry to his house. I just stayed there for a little while, but I was on my motorcycle for 6 weeks trying to break out of my funk that had been created since my wreck, my confidence and everything, and I didn't get it back. So I no longer rode after that, but I had to at least try. Anyway, I went to go visit Brian, and sad to say that when I got there, we were talking. Man, great place to. I mean, Brandenburg, Kentucky is kind of it's just a pretty picturesque kind of a town anyway, but pulling up in his driveway, man, I was like, wow. I mean, just a great piece of land and everything. But I got up there, I got to his garage, and we're bullshitting a few minutes, and you know, we hadn't seen each other in a few minutes, and he said, "Well, Chuck, you know, your room's going to be here," and he showed me where the bathroom is. Anyway, he goes, "Yeah," he says, "and tomorrow we're going to have dinner over my mom's if you'd like to join us, you know." I said, "What about your dad?" His dad had just passed away just 2 months prior or whatever, with 3 months prior from COVID. And I don't know, I felt bad for Brian, obviously, but it just made me realize too. I thought, man, this COVID thing is because his dad at the time, I believe Mr. Hammy was like in his early 70s probably. But anyway, you know, worked for 50 years on a goddamn towboat, you know, and then have something like COVID happen. But I know Brian and his dad were close. And for him to have just lost his father just a couple months prior, and he's telling me this in his garage, I thought, wow. And so when you mentioned Angelina had COVID earlier, that's what made me think of Brian. And that was the conversation that he brought up about with catching the boat and whatnot, with being on our immune system. But yeah, his dad had Joe Matt. I only met him just a couple times, but he's a great guy. But how close they were, I'll give you an idea. And what I tried to do to help Brian years ago, we were both pilots on the Keith Darling, Brian and I were. So we relieved one another. We were never off the boat at the same time. But we would always call the boat a day or two before, normal shit, you know, "Hey, where you at? How's the fuel?" You know, blah, blah, blah. And Brian, he called me one day, and I'll never forget, because it was in September. And he said, Charlie said, I'm gonna ask you a really big favor. He says, "and if you say no, I'll understand." I said, "Okay, go shoot." You know, we had been relieving one another a couple years at this point. You know, he said, he goes, "Man, my dad and I," because his dad was still working at the time for ACBL, and we were with AEP. He said, my dad and I are on complete opposite rotation on the day. And I knew that that was a big thing for him once he said that, because he had always been off with his dad hunting, doing things of that nature all the time. And I said, okay, well, and he says, would you be willing to switch rotations and let me take yours and you take mine? He says, it don't have to be soon. It could be after the holidays, after Christmas. And I just really want to be with my dad more. And I didn't think twice. I said, sure, Brian. Yeah, no problem. I said, you just want to plan on after the first of the year? Because this was, like I said, it was in September. Here's the irony, or the synchronicity with what happened. On the next trip, I'm getting ready to get off. Brian had just gotten on. Now we're at Vicksburg. The boat store has delivered our crew. We've done our turn out and swap over. I go down the stairs, get on the passenger boat for Ergon. We go across the river to the Wilbur Mills and get Brian's daddy off of there to get on the boat with us to go home. I mean, that's how opposite they were. And it happened that next trip. I was like, wow. But I told him then, I said, Cap, I said, I'm working with Brian to help you guys out, man, because I'd like to think that if I was in that situation that Brian was in, I'd like to think someone would help me out. And I mean, to be on the complete opposite rotation of your father or your son, I like to think that someone would do that for me if Charlie ever came out on the boats and if I was still out there. So I told him, I said, Captain Mac, I said, I'm gonna work with Brian to where you guys get your time off together again in a few months here. And but yeah, he passed away in 2020. And Brian, great guy. Great pilot, man. I'm serious, buddy. Talk about slick. But the other thing I liked about Brian, that I really liked about Brian, always erred on the side of caution. And I liked that because so did I. And I'll give you an example. I'm coming down at Alhambra, got 40. And at that point, you're already listening for guys coming up around 81 mile point, and this storm comes in, man, and I could see it on a radar. It's like right at 5:30. 3 boats coming up around 81. Ship coming down behind me going about 100 mile an hour. And the weather's not looking good. Well, where I'm at on the radar, I ran my range rings out and I counted. I thought, man, I'm gonna be down there right at 1800, starting to flank on the point down at and at Philadelphia. And because I backed up at Philadelphia quite a bit. I did. A lot of guys don't, but I did anyway. When the storm was coming, everything else, prime example of why I liked working with him was about 5:30-ish, give or take. I still had plenty of real estate up there, up above the ranges. I set her to backing. I didn't even land. I just kind of got her in a hover mode. By the time I did, it was about 10 minutes to 6. I finished out my log, got all that done. Storm was there, came and passed. Brian came up. He looked around. He took it where it was at, right? Type of thing. But he thanked me. He said, man, thanks for not having me down there at the point. Thanks for waiting because of the weather, of not knowing. You don't want to get down on one of them flanks, man, with 40 barges and have a storm, a squall that comes through and blacks out your radar, your vision. So Brian and I, great team, I think, because that's how we worked with one another to try to make sure that we didn't put someone in a situation that we wouldn't want to be in, just getting on watch. And especially listening to the weather, listening to other boats. I mean, if you're southbound and you hear the word fog from someone 20 miles down below, right? When you got 40 barges, you're 8 wide, you better start looking for a place already. You know, you don't want to wait until you get into fog and try to have to stop. I mean, that sucks. I want to still stop when I can see the bank. But I said all that to say this. That is ideal working with a guy like Brian. I've worked with many. If you were southbound and you would have had, especially the older cats, you'd have been, and there wasn't a shutout storm, there wasn't a boat right there on the point, they would chastise you. What are you doing, man? You can make the company money this fucking way. Come ahead on this thing. I've been told that more than once. And when I've been told that, so okay, Cat, you got it then, right? Okay, great. Because I'm putting you in a situation that's comfortable. You can stay stopped or you can go, but at least you have that option. I'd much rather have you yell at me for not making the company money than to be yelling at me for having you down on a point, trying to flank it when there's a northbounder coming and a shutout storm. I'd much rather have an ass chewing now. And that's the way I felt about it, by God, because there's one person, I've already mentioned him here recently, that he did that to me one time. And I said, hey, that's fine. Because he hollered, buddy. When I say hollered, I'm talking about veins popping out the neck and shit. He said, don't ever have me stopped northbound in fog, is what he said. Not for me. He said, don't ever do it for me. I said, okay, I won't. But I'm going to ask you now, do it for me. I don't care what direction we're pointed. If there's fog somewhere and I'm getting ready to take the watch and you have a place to stop, if you don't, I'm not going to take the watch, Cap, because I'm not comfortable doing that. And I'll give credit where it's due. This guy I'm mentioning right now, one night we were southbound below Memphis and coming down around not Huffman, my other Huffman. Fuck. It doesn't matter. Coming around the Wiggles. When I got up there and I looked around, even though it's midnight, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see. If it's a clear night, you can see your peep light and all the ambient light. But when you can't see your first coupling 200 feet out in front of you and you're making 10 mile an hour, when I first get up there, I got up there. I looked around and said, looking a little foggy there, ain't it, Cap? And like I said, I'll give credit where it's due. This is what he said. Kulage, you sit down and enjoy yourself, have some coffee, and I'll get us stopped. He stayed in that chair for an extra hour and a half almost that night. So as he asked, I didn't ever have him stopped again northbound in fog. I might have him in a holding pattern off the bank or something if I didn't feel comfortable doing it. And he didn't expect me to run if he was in fog at watch change. He would take it to the bank for me. You know, that's just different, I guess you'd say, mindsets. But Brian, back to Brian Hamilton, that's why I think he and I worked together so well, was because there were just certain things we would talk about at watch change, like going into the fleet and doing this or doing that. Well, both of us always agreed whatever is best for the crew, that is the least amount of work for them to still get the job done safely and get the barge wired in. But Tim, not everybody thinks that way, man. There are some captains and pilots out there that it makes you wonder, did they ever spend a day out on a fucking deck? Because they'll get somewhere and dissect a tow to pull out one barge and have the boys out there laying a bunch of extra fucking wires when they really don't need it, right? Type of thing that I would never go against. If that's what the captain had planned, that's what we're doing. But if you can save someone's back, if you can save someone from having to tow an extra set of rigging out, 4 or 5 couplings, it shows in the long run. I think it does, you know, and that's why I liked working with Brian. And he and his dad, man, they sounded alike. They looked alike too. Hmm. But yeah, if you ever get him on your show, you got yourself a good guy there, old Brian Hamilton.
I'll make a
He
note.
was
I'll make a
he
note.
was
Hopefully this reaches him.
yeah, he was oh shit, it's February 13th, I think, is his birthday, 1970. So he is 54 now. Wow. Old fucker. Huh. Man, I wonder if he's going to retire soon. He's got 3 boys, and one of them works on the river. I think for Ingram actually, because his I don't know if he still works there or not. But when I went to visit Brian, it was his son's. He had just gotten back from his first trip. I want to say on a Dave Carlton or one of them boats. I forget. One of them 5,600 gray boats, I think. But yeah, yeah.
Well, look, man, I think that'll do it. We're coming up on midnight here, and I've been at it since about 4:45 this morning. So,
Oh, are you in the Central Time Zone as well?
yes, sir.
I'll be there.
Well,
I'm
look,
just messing.
keep in touch with me for sure. If I don't hear from you in a couple of weeks or whatever it is, if you do end up committing to a detox and rehab and recovery, let me know kind of that you're going into it, so I'm not trying to light you up and bug you to record while you're going through
Sure.
going through the motions.
Yeah, and if I think about it, and it's not like a rush thing, I'll send you a text as well, because although I think you can still have your phone there, I think there's certain times for it. Understandably, because you're there to learn and to try to get better. But so I'll probably text you before I would even get in there and just say, "Hey Tim, my name came up. I'm see you later, buddy." Yeah.
I look forward to that message, man, and the conversations that will follow. So,
Yeah, man, I do too. And hopefully I still got a home to come back to. I don't think
yeah,
I'd do very well in an old refrigerator box up underneath the bridge somewhere. I don't think I'd make it for very long.
well, here's to brighter days, my friend.
Yeah, indeed. Hey man, take care.
You
And
too,
if you
bud.
can't take care, then be courteous.
Roger on
That's what
that.
my cousin says.